Right, let's look at the melee weapons in Baldur's Gate. Um, so on this table, you're mainly going to want to be looking at the left-hand side of the screen, where I've listed the weapons you can get, and I've arranged them by the average damage that they do. So at the top, you have the weapons that do the most damage, moving down to the weapon that does the least damage. Now, are there better weapons in Baldur's Gate? Well, if you look at this table, as hopefully we're going to see, you'll probably find that there are some weapons that are a little bit better than other weapons, but the game's very balanced, and as you get into the game, you're mainly going to be wanting magical versions of these weapons. So what happens is that if a weapon here perhaps doesn't quite seem as good as other weapons for some reason, in the game it's likely that that's taken into account. So you might find a magical version of that weapon that's ever so slightly better than the other weapons. So it kind of balances out. So, right, starting at the bottom, you've got the dagger, which is the quickest weapon. It's the cheapest weapon and the lightest weapon. It does a piercing attack, which is very good, particularly. It's good late game as well, but particularly in the early game when you've got lots of people running around with leather armour, the piercing attacks can be one that you're most likely to hit with. And also with the dagger, you can find throwing daggers as well, so it gives you a ranged weapon there. Moving up into the weapons that on average do 3.5 points damage by the weapon itself. You've got the short sword, again quite a quick weapon, does piercing damage, which is great. Next you've got the club and the warhammer, very similar. If you look at the warhammer, it's slightly heavier than the club, and I believe later on in the game or in the series you can get hammers that can be thrown, which is that skill as well. Now the quarterstaff and the spear, if you look at the spear, it seems to be slightly slower than the other weapons that do 3.5 points average damage. But if you're willing to invest in the two-handed weapon skill with 2 pips in it, the quarterstaff can end up with a speed of 0, which makes it the fastest weapon you can get. And the spear, if you put 2 pips in it as well, the two-handed weapon skill, that comes out at the same speed as the dagger. So those are two-handed weapons, but they're very quick at striking. Moving up into the weapons that on average do 4.5 points and 5 points, the longsword is quite a standard weapon. We get introduced here to the weapons that do slashing damage. Compare the longsword and the battle axe. The battle axe has a speed of 7, so it's slower than the longsword, which strikes first with a speed of 5. So perhaps you think that the longsword is therefore a better weapon than the battle axe. Something to take into account with the battle axe skill is that it also enables you to throw axes as well, which you'll come across in the game. So you have a weapon that's slightly slower than a longsword, but one which gives you a ranged attack as well. Right, we'll skip the exotic weapons there. Scimitar, very similar to the longsword really. Now the bastard sword, it does a little bit more damage than the longsword and the scimitar, but check that speed out. It's got a speed of 8, which for a one-handed weapon I think makes it the slowest one-handed weapon. In fact, to the point where the Morning Star, the flail, the mace, the battle axe will all hit before the bastard sword. So that's quite a big deal really. The blunt weapons, we've got the mace, the flail and the Morning Star. The flail isn't so good compared with the other two. The advantage of the mace is that it's slightly lighter, a weight of 8 compared with 15 there. The advantage of the Morning Star is that it does slightly more damage, and all of those do blunt attacks, which is a very, very good form of damage to be doing, particularly against things like plate armour later on in the game, that kind of thing. Skip the katana for a second. Now the two big two-handed weapons. Remember, with two-handed weapons, you can bring that the weapon speed right down by spending the pips. So a halberd can come out at the speed of a longsword if you invest those pips in it. The halberd just seems better, doesn't it? It's got a speed of 9, so it's quicker than the two-handed sword, and also it's got a special kind of damage, whereby when it comes to hitting your opponent, the halberd would choose the form of attack that works best against the opponent's armour. So a lot of the time it'll act as if it's a piercing attack, and piercing attacks are very good against a whole range of armours when compared with slashing weapons. Now that leaves us with these exotic weapons, the katana, the wakizashi, the ninja toe, right? If you take a careful look at these weapons, they just seem to be superior weapons. Like the katana does as much damage as the two-handed weapons, but it's a one-handed weapon. Speed incredible for very lightweight. The wakizashi does a piercing damage, and piercing is very good compared with slashing damage against the majority of armor types. Also, it's very quick, very lightweight, so they seem to be superior weapons. But as I said before, with the game balance, the thing to bear in mind with these weapons is that you're probably going to find very few examples of them in the game. So they're superior weapons, but you won't find very many of them. So just give that consideration before you choose that as a weapon skill.